What if I told you that one of the most interesting knives released in the past couple of years doesn't use a premium steel, doesn't cost much more than $100, and comes from a brand that might honestly surprise you? Because today we're taking a look at the Riot PL-XT. And right off the bat, we have a pretty catchy name here, but behind that, we actually have a really exciting knife. Now, if you've been around the knife community for any amount of time, you probably know Riot as a company behind some incredibly high-end production knives. They're actually known for some pretty high-end premium materials, really great machining, and prices well out of my price range that often push well north of $300. So when Riot released a knife kind of around that $100 mark with completely new locking system, I kind of perked up and was pretty interested. I've always wanted to give Riot a shot, and now with a knife at this price range, this was my first and only shot. So here's the real question. Is the PL-XT actually a great everyday carry knife, or is this just another cool fidget fun toy with a reputable name backing it up? Let's find out. So quick background, the PL-XT was designed by Alvin Lee and is part of Riot's attempt at bringing their build quality down to a much more affordable price range. And right off the bat, this is a really great move as Riot has some really great knives, but they're all kind of out of my price range. So having a budget offering is a really great choice as I can try out a knife from a company I never would have before and see if I like it enough to spring for the more premium offerings. And honestly, my first impressions were pretty good. The scales feel really nice in hand, the action is super smooth and crisp, and it fits in the hand pretty nicely. Really nothing about this knife really feels cheap or lacking. The version I have here features black micarta scales with these cutout holes and then a stone-washed Nitro V blade. I kind of feel like this design is a little bit more aggressive and modern than what I typically gravitate towards, but it's still practical enough for everyday use. But the real star of the show here is thanks to this unique pivot lock system, which we'll talk about more in later. This pivot lock, kind of like this, is kind of rare, and these are kind of newer locking mechanisms, and this one definitely has it really nailed down. Before we go further, let's first cover the basics. So this knife features a closed length of 3.9 inches, and then it has a 3-inch Nitro V drop point stonewash blade. Then we have an overall length of 6.9 inches. This also comes with black micarta handle scales, a simple titanium pocket clip that can be swapped over to either side, an aluminum backspacer, a crazy cool pivot lock, ball bearing deployment, and then finally a weight around 4.3 ounces. So the overall footprint kind of puts us right in a nice sweet spot for an everyday carry. It's compact enough to disappear in the pocket, but still definitely large enough to handle most daily cutting tasks. The one thing I will note is that you'll notice almost immediately is that this knife feels more substantial than its dimensions kind of suggest. Because due to this locking mechanism in the pivot, this knife is actually much thicker than you would first inspect. Because one of the first things that I actually noticed, and it kind of caught me off guard when I picked it up for the first time. This is definitely no Benchmade bug out. This guy is a chunk. Fortunately, I really like the rest of the knife, so it's not a total deal breaker, but it's something to keep in mind because this guy is definitely thick. Now, it's one thing to just look at a knife in a video and try to gauge its size and footprint, so let's instead compare it to some other knives that a lot of people are familiar with. So first up, we'll bring up the Rat 1 to kind of see the size difference here. And now the Rat 1 is one of the best all-time great budget knives. And compared to the Rat 1, the PL-XT feels significantly much smaller. The Rat is about a full inch larger when closed, and when opened, it just absolutely dwarfs this Riot. Now let's say goodbye to the Rat for a second and bring in a crowd favorite. And that's going to be, of course, the Kaiser Drop Bear. And this is in fact a lot closer. And in fact, they're almost the exact same size. So now with the Drop Bear out, I actually want to compare their thickness because already off the bat, the Drop Bear is not a thin knife. The aluminum scales here are actually a little bit thicker than other knives when compared to the Riot. This is still extremely skinny. I mean, look at the size difference here. The Riot is just so much more thicker, which is again due to that pivot lock. This is definitely a chunky knife. But the real question is, does this lock make up for it? And for sure it makes up for it. The lock here is really interesting and not just a gimmick. Instead of a traditional button lock or a crossbar lock, Riot integrated the locking mechanism into the pivot itself. And this pivot lock actually works really well and it's super smooth and pretty responsive. And once you deploy the blade by either the lock or the thumb studs, just pressing in the pivot allows the blade to fall closed. It's really smooth and satisfying, and it makes this a really great knife to kind of fidget with. And if you're worried about the safety of this lock and you feel like you might press it in when using it, this actually comes with a small backup safety lock, toggle, switch, whatever you want it. You can activate it so the pivot lock is supported and won't accidentally prematurely close. And though I don't really use this switch, I think it's a kind of a smart decision for those that might want this. And best of all, it's out of the way, and I kind of even forget it's there when you don't want to use it. Button locks and top liner locks are becoming so much more common nowadays, and I can kind of see why. Because when done right, they work really great and I love it. But more often than not, they can feel a little bit mushy and leave a little bit to be desired. So unlike some of the previous button locks I've used in the past, the lock engagement here actually feels really solid and really well done. But that said, it's not perfect. And though I haven't personally encountered any issues with it yet, I've seen some reports online of some people saying that there's an occasional button stick or lock stick, particularly early on. I managed to pick this knife up secondhand, so it's entirely possible mine was just broken in, and I haven't had any issue with mine at all. And in fact, mine is really smooth, so your mileage may vary on that front. But still, from an innovation standpoint, I really love seeing companies try something different, because this pivot lock really gives the knife a really unique identity in a sea of crossbar locks and button locks. Is this my favorite lock in the world? No, probably not, but I still lean towards a crossbar lock, but it's still really exciting seeing and trying something new sometimes. And at least for this example, this one works really well. Now with the action out of the way, I kind of want to pivot over to the blade. So Riot chose Nitro V steel here, and honestly, I think it's kind of an interesting decision. Because sure, everybody loves talking about the premium steels like MagnaCut, S90V, or some other super steel, but in order to keep the price down here, looks like they went with a more budget steel, which is the case because this one has Nitro V. So is it my favorite steel in the world? Of course not. But Nitro V is incredibly practical for what it is. It really takes a good edge, it's easy to sharpen, it offers good corrosion resistance, and it provides more than enough edge retention for the vast majority of cutting tasks you'll do every day. I really think this knife would be absolutely killer with a more premium blade steel, but that would have meant a higher price, which probably would have prevented me from picking this up in the first place, so I can kind of live with that compromise. Overall, I kind of really like the blade here. This blade shape is also a huge win. It's a drop point profile, so very versatile. It really features a kind of a nice stone wash finish here, so this should handle and hide anywhere really nicely, so you don't have to really worry about babying this blade. There is just a little bit of branding here on the show side, but it's pretty small, so it doesn't really bother me too much. This lock, paired with this blade, really kind of lends this knife to be a really great everyday carry knife. It has a usable performing steel, great action, and a really usable, nice blade shape that just makes this a really strong contender for a really great EDC knife. Now there's a lot to like here, but there's also some things that kind of leave me scratching my head. So let's quickly run through some pros and cons and kind of see how this stacks up. So for the pros, first up is just the build quality. I kind of feel like this knife feels much more expensive than it actually is. The build quality and the fit and finish is just excellent. The micarta scales feel nice, having a titanium pocket clip is great, and the aluminum backspacer here in the back really makes this knife just look finished and premium. And second is the action and the lock, of course. Because whether you love it or hate it, it's different and it's refreshing. It's smooth, satisfying, and incredibly fun, and it actually works really well to fidget with, and it's also a finger-safe mechanism as it keeps your fingers out of the cutting path of the blade. I think this works really well, and it makes the knife also look a little bit cleaner too, because this pivot lock here just looks like a standard pivot. But there are some cons. But I really do like this knife, so I really don't have a ton of criticisms. The biggest downside for me is just probably the thickness. For a relatively small knife, it kind of feels heavier and wider than I would expect. Some people might kind of love that solid feeling, but for me, I don't really need a knife to be super thin like a bug out, but this one's a little bit thicker than I really would have expected and really anticipated. It's a chunky boy, and it is kind of noticeable in the pocket. And another reason it might be a little bit more noticeable in the pocket is due to this pocket clip. Don't get me wrong, I think it's excellent they went with titanium, but it's another area where I kind of think there's some room for improvement a little bit. I just kind of wish this was a deeper carry design. It's really great that the clip is reversible for either side, but it leaves a nice chunk of the knife riding above the pocket. Now I kind of want to briefly cover value, because this is where this becomes a little bit more interesting, because depending on how you classify it, this is not a budget knife, at least in my definition. This has a retail price just over the $100 mark, and it retails for around $112 right now. And again, depending on your budget, that's not exactly cheap, because there's a lot of competition around this price range. So is this a fair value or a massive overpay? I think it's kind of somewhere in the middle. There's some absolutely great knives out there with better steel, much thinner design, and a better overall carrying experience. But then here you're getting Riot manufacturing quality, and I think that's a kind of a big deal because the fit and finish is really great here. This company puts out knives often at much, much higher prices, and this gives you a little sample into their offerings. The fit and finish is excellent, and this feels like a premium knife that has slipped into the budget category. I feel like over $100 though for Nitro V is a little bit steep, as you can find this steel on a knife as low as $50, But on the other side of the coin, you're getting a really smooth and interesting pivot lock that works much better than I actually expected. I personally feel like this is a little bit overpriced, and I feel like this would be a much better buy closer to the $80 mark. I was fortunate enough to pick this one up secondhand at a really hefty discount, and for that, I'm more than happy with it. Would I feel the same if I paid the full retail price right now? Probably not. Just something to keep in mind. If you're really interested in this one, I say watch for a sale or just kind of keep your eyes open on the secondary market. So is the Riot PL-XT worth buying and carrying? I think the answer is for sure yes. It's not the best slicer, it's not the lightest or most comfortable carry, and it's definitely not the steel king for its price bracket. But what it does offer is something that a lot of knives don't. It actually has some personality. The pivot lock is unique, and the action is honestly rather addictive. The build quality is outstanding, and every time you pick this up, this reminds you it's not just a standard run-of-the-mill budget knife. It's a Riot. If you're somebody who actually appreciates really great fit and finish, you enjoy a little bit of a fidget action, and you want something different from the endless stream of like crossbar locks flooding the market right now, this PL-XT kind of deserves a serious look. And now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this knife? Do you think this is one of the best values on Riot's lineup, or would you rather spend your money on something else, possibly the bit higher end materials? Really let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.